Okay, so I'm looking at my computer, so you can pull up your computer when you're doing this. And the first thing that you need to know is, we know that this paper is 8.5 by 11. So if I put my ruler, the 0 on the edge of the paper exactly, and then I see that this is 11 and this is 0. What is half of 11? 5.5. So if I make a mark at 5.5, I'm going to make one there. And then I'm going to exactly put this on here. So a lot of you made mistakes where you did not draw your line straight because you measured one side or the other wrong. So I'm going to make a tiny mark there at 5.5. And I'm going to start with my center lines just because, I don't know. You can start with the margins or start with the center lines. There's my 5.5 inch line. Okay, that's my center line. All right, then I need to measure and make a center line here. So I know that this paper, if I put my ruler on the 0 to 8.5, and if the paper's not cut perfectly, I would just try to like put the lines on either side evenly. It's a teeny bit smaller, but not much. What's half of 8.5? What's half of 8? 4. What's half of a half?
Quarter.
A quarter, right? So it's 4 1/4. So I put a little mark at 4 1/4. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this end. So I'm going to put a little mark at 4 1/4. So that's how you have to be thinking when you're centering things. You have to be thinking about dividing them in half. That way you find your center line and then you can put it in the right spot. So there's my center line. So I've got my horizontal and vertical center lines. I'm just going to draw one of the margins because they're all the same. All the margins around the edges are 1.5 inches. Okay, so that means you're not dividing anything on those, right? But you want to make your little tick, your little mark. You want to keep your ruler as straight as you can when you do that, just because if you angle it, it might not be accurate. So I'm going to make a little mark at 1.5, and I'm going to go down to the bottom and make sure that I'm putting it in the right spot, 1.5. And then I am going to carefully put my ruler on the edges of either of those dots and be careful not to let it slip. I had a few people that had their lines going like this a little bit on the, this looks crooked to me. 1.5. It is crooked. I did it wrong. Oh no. So this is wrong. That's what happens when you measure it wrong and then you get the whole line wrong. So let's do that again. That's what erasers are for. Oops. Nobody even called me out on it. All right. So this end was right. So this little mark was fine. But I made this one 1 1/4. And I said to make it 1.5. So let's fix it. That's a pretty, look at how far off that is. That's a whole 1/4 inch off. That could make for some wacky looking, oh, see, I slipped. So you have to be really careful about holding it still. I'm kind of at a weird angle. It's really hard for me to do this. I would turn your paper, but so I'm going to make my line. That's better. Now it looks straight. Okay, so always check yourself like I just did. All right, 1.5. Okay, so you're going to make 1.5 here and there, but I'm not going to do that for the demo. All right, I really want you to realize how to make the squares. Okay, so if I say make a 1 inch square centered on the paper, that doesn't mean 1 inch from the line, because how big is that square going to be? If I mark it at 1 inch, how big would that square be? Are you all awake? 2 inches, right? Because if I mark an inch here and an inch there and I draw my lines, then it's going to be 2 inches. So if I need to make a 1 inch square, I'm going to first make my 1 inch lines on either side. So I'm going to make a tiny little dot here and here, and just about an inch away, because I'm going to make a tiny little line for my guide. So there and there. So that's 1 inch, right? And I'm just going to go and draw guidelines, and I'm going to do them very lightly. Just a light little line. You might not even be able to see it on the projector. You can probably see it in the video though. So there's my guide. So it's a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch. We'll make one, right? So I'm putting it in the middle. And then I need to make it the other way too. So I'm gonna put my line on the 1/2 inch, and I'm gonna make a little mark here and a little mark here. And the same here. I'm gonna put this right on that center line there, because I'm centering it on the paper. And then I do just like I did with the other stuff. And now I know that my line ends there, so I can draw it darker. My line ends here. And then I'll go back and use those little guidelines I made to finish it up. Okay, so when you're drawing a centered item, you just go ahead and you divide in half and you make your mark. So this is 1 inch and 1 inch, okay? All right, so how do I make, and then you can just erase these light lines. Those are just little guidelines I made, right? Okay, so now I need to make a 3 inch. Okay, so what's half of 3? 1 1/2. So I'm just gonna go up here and I'm gonna put this on the center line, my vertical center line. I'm gonna put it at 1 1/2, and I'm gonna mark it at 0 and 3. And then I'm gonna come down here, put it at 1 1/2, mark it at 0 and 3. And then I'm gonna go ahead and make little guidelines, and I'll darken it up after I get the other lines in, but I'm just gonna make light line going like that. And a light line going like that. Okay, so now I have this, and now I have to measure it from this center. Okay, so I can put it right on this part because this is the edge of where my square is gonna be. And I'm gonna put it at 1 1/2. And I'm gonna mark it at 1 and 3. And I can even draw that line. Well, I'll wait. Then I'm gonna mark this one at 1 and 3. And I'm gonna go ahead and make the horizontal part. Remember, you're getting scored for each correct line, so if you do one wrong on the square, then that will be a mark off. So what you want to be really careful about making all of your lines on the square accurate. Otherwise, it won't be a square. I saw a lot of rectangles on the first page, or on the first test. Now, we know that a square is a rectangle, but they were like, they were supposed to be, I think, 4 inches and 2 inches. And I think they were like 5 inches by 3 inches and all kinds of stuff. Like, people didn't even measure. So I do want you to measure. I want you to use your skills. That's how you make a centered square. Okay, so there's my 1 inch square and my 3 inch square in the very center of the paper, because I first measured the horizontal and vertical lines in the center of the paper. And then you're gonna make a 1 1/2 inch border all the way around. I'm not gonna go ahead and do that. I think that's enough, and you can figure the rest out. So that's what we're gonna do today.